Hello, good afternoon, everyone. We're waiting for just a few people to join us from the waiting room, but very excited to see you all here this afternoon to hear more about the Erasmus Mundus Joint Masters Program. Great. Wonderful. Welcome. I am Heidi Bretz. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a fellowships advisor here at the University of South Carolina, Columbia. I know a lot of you are joining from our university, but we also have some guests from other institutions today. So welcome. I'm very excited to share with you some of our knowledge about Erasmus Mundus. Of course, the main attraction, you're here to hear from current Erasmus Mundus participants and alums, Amanda Tregdy and Jordan Hammond. So very excited to introduce them. I will do a brief introduction just of our office, what we do, kind of what fellowships are generally, how we can help USC students, and then I will turn it over for the rest of the time for our special guests. Right. Well, as I said, welcome. This is the National Fellowships and Scholar Programs team that's presenting this from the University of South Carolina. So I just wanted to start off with a question that some of you may be asking yourselves. What exactly are fellowships? So fellowships are an award and an opportunity that are nationally competitive. So what do we mean when we say nationally competitive? So these are pots of funding that are controlled by governments, are controlled by organizations like the EU, like different foundations that they have set aside and they want students and alumni to apply for to do certain things. So usually it's attached to an experience of some kind. They are open to students from all over the US and even possibly the world. So they're not restricted to any one particular institution. And then they're not coordinated by our team. So USC is not the one that holds the funding. It's not our money, but it belongs to someone else. We just know where to find it and we can help you figure out which fellowships are going to be the best fit for you and apply. And for those of you who maybe are new to fellowships, you may hear the word competitive a lot. So when we think about national fellowships, like with anything in life, there are potentially more people interested than there are slots. So when we think about competitiveness, it means that there are more people interested than they maybe have funding for, but really competitiveness breaks down to being about fit. How good of a fit is the particular opportunity for what you're interested in, your goals, your skill sets, things like that. So that's something that our team can help with. And if you're not from USC, getting connected with your national fellowships team is a really good way to kind of figure out what options are out there. I know our database that we have has upwards of 350 different opportunities now, and we help students to explore all of those different ways that they can potentially get some funding and to figure out which ones they're going to be the best fit for. And so again, a fellowship is an award and an opportunity. It's a source of funding that can lead to experiences like grad school abroad, language learning, research, public policy, college tuition, lots of things. If there's something you can think of, there's probably a national fellowship for it, from researching the gut microbiome on the Dannon Yogurt Fellowship all the way to inclusive blacksmithing. So there's a little bit of something for everyone. And the Erasmus Mundus in particular has a lot of really great interdisciplinary programs that are just really cool. And hopefully you'll find one in there that's a good fit for your specific interests. So who are we? So National Fellowships and Scholar Programs at USC is a team of advisors that helps USC students and alums apply for these kinds of opportunities. We're housed in the Honors College, but we do serve students across campus. And are more than happy to talk with any of you about your interests and goals. We do have different specialty areas. Mine is international fellowships, which is why I'm here today. But we also have a director who specializes in more public policy, UK awards, Val Weingart, who does first and second year fellowships, as well as Matt Kaufmanstein that helps with our graduate students. But you can meet with any of us to get started in the world of fellowships. And so what does our team offer? So again, we have over 350 opportunities in our database. And what we do is we really sit down with you. We talk about your goals, we talk about your interests, and help you to find a really good match among all these different opportunities for ones that would be a good fit for you that you should apply for. So we help you find the right fit. And then we also help you through the application process from finding the fit to hopefully being awarded a fellowship and coming back as an alum to do presentations like these. So we'll help you with essay review, with understanding application requirements, interview prep if necessary, support for figuring out next steps, and regardless of outcome, we provide moral support for you because the answer maybe isn't always yes, but if you don't apply, the answer is always no. So that's kind of our philosophy of fellowships, and we are here to support you every step of the way. And just as a way of kind of thinking about these different opportunities and how to position yourself as a good applicant, it's really thinking about what the connections are between you, your skill set, your interests, your goals, your passions, why they're a good fit for the program or the project that you're applying for, the fellowship, why the particular areas of interest to you, especially if you're thinking about Erasmus Mundus. Why would you want to go to the Netherlands or France or Slovenia? What are those locations going to help you with? What are they going to help you to do next? And then why now? Why is now a good time for you to do this thing? Are you at a critical transition period? Is it setting you up for a future professional goal or academic goal? Thinking about why now is a good time. And then finally, really thinking deeply about why this award. So you've already gone through the process of kind of figuring out if a fellowship is a good fit for you, but really articulating what is it about your goals and your interests that align with the goals and interests of the program that is funding you? Because of course, if they're funding students to do things, the different foundations that are distributing this funds, like they have priorities too. So how do your priorities and skill sets align? And that can be something that can really set you apart when you are preparing your application. And next steps in the process for those of you who are here at USC, we do have a database, our info database that you can find from our website with those 350 different opportunities. Take a look at that, explore some of the filters that we have just to get a sense of what all is out there. Make an appointment with us. If you're an undergraduate, you can make an appointment via Navigate, or if you are a graduate or alumni, you can use Calendly to schedule a meeting with us. And finally, complete your candidate profile. And I will send this PowerPoint after our meeting, as well as the recording, just again to let you know this is being recorded, and we'll be sharing it afterwards. So there will be a bit of Q&A interaction throughout the presentation at your discretion. So just know if you don't want to be recorded, make sure to keep your camera off and your microphone muted, and you should be just fine. But if you are interested in asking questions, we'll have opportunities for that throughout the presentation. But for those of you who are USC students, fill out a candidate profile that puts you in our database so that we know that you're interested in fellowships. And that way we'll reach out to you when things like Erasmus Mundus come up. And that way you don't have to necessarily remember everything. Every deadline, every award that you might be interested in, that'll be helpful in keeping track of it so that we can keep in touch with you. All right, so without further ado then, as I shift to our other presentation, I'm going to have Jordan and Amanda introduce themselves. Thank you so much.
I guess it's afternoon for you guys now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining wherever you're joining from. We will have a slide and a few slides that tells a little bit more about Amanda and I. So without further ado, welcome once again to the Erasmus Mundus USA webinar. It is the first time we've done a USA focused webinar, which is very exciting. There has finally in the past year or so been more interest from USC and in general United States passport holders. I will specify why I say that in a little bit, but as Erasmus Mundus has now pegged the United States as a target region, so they are dedicating a few more scholarships to US passport holders. Many of our students from various Erasmus Mundus programs do hold multiple passports, as it does attract a very international audience. So when I'm referring to US passport holders, I probably just say Americans, but you will be considered both when you apply. It is important to specify that. And we will go ahead with our PowerPoint. Once again, it will be recorded. So if there are things you want to ask about more personal questions, things like that, we do have our email at the end, and you can always email Heidi as well, and she can direct your question to us if you don't want to share it in a group. Here's a little bit about what's to come. We'll explain a little bit more about what Erasmus Mundus is, what an EMJM is, which is the type of program that you will be applying for. These are unique in that you don't actually have to get a fellowship scholarship to be a part of them. Of course, getting funded is always the goal. A little bit about what they offer, why, and then some tips and questions.
Okay, this is who we are. I can go first. I am Amanda, and I am from South Carolina. I just graduated from USC in December. I'm currently doing the IMBRC program, which is a master's in marine biological resources. My first semester is in France, and I will go to Portugal next, then Sweden, and to finish off in Italy. And I'm really enjoying it so far. I just joined EMA as well, so I'm glad to be here presenting the information to you guys as well.
And I'm Jordan. I graduated in 2022, so I had the striking realization that I've been out of USC longer than I was actually in it. Crazy to think. Still very connected to it, though. You can see the sweatshirt, still watch the games. It is very fun to have an international community of USC students abroad. I do find people with Gamecock hats on the metro, things like that. Very fun to see. Go Gamecocks. Cool international environment. I'm from Atlanta, and I graduated from USC in 2022, like I said, in Europub Health, a public health focused program in 2022. And now I'm in medical school. So I, in fact, stayed abroad, have 4 more years until I returned to the US. And now I'm in Italy, but I was in Spain, the Netherlands, and France as well. So you'll hear us say things like EMMA, EMJM, and I'll explain what that is. EMMA is the Erasmus Mundus Association. So that is a group of current students and alumni of any one of these Erasmus Mundus programs. Used to have PhDs, now it is just masters. There are country representatives like Amanda and I, program representatives for most of the programs. I am also one for my specific program. And then there are various project leaders. So for example, I led a project based on visa hurdles, depending on where you were from and where you were going, to try to advise the EU when making policies on student visas to hopefully create an international student visa just for Erasmus Mundus students. So very interesting to get involved in a global educational policy, making things like that. Good, thank you. An EMJM, I'll probably just call it an Erasmus Masters in the future, is an Erasmus Mundus Joint Master. And that means that you are getting 2 master's degrees. Mine, for example, I had an MPH and an MS, along with a joint certificate proving that I did this in a specific kind of joint program. But it means that you'll be studying in at least 2 European institutions in 2 different countries. usually 3 to 4. Each program has a consortium of the partner institutions, so the universities you're with. Generally, EMA, the Erasmus Mundus Association, will be a partner in that consortium as well, along with many different companies and stakeholders that will host you for internships, that will be guest speakers, things like that. And they are funded by the EU's Directorate General for Education. So when I mentioned earlier that the EU has pegged the US as a target region, it means that they have decided that they want more qualified US graduates, whether you're about to graduate, whether you've been out of undergrad for 10 years, they want more qualified American students to come reap the benefits of this fellowship and this type of scholarship. It is an international program, so there are many, many people from all of the upwards of 200 countries we have in the world. Very unique experience, and Amanda will talk a little bit more about that later. You can go anywhere, so this is not an exhaustive list, and there may be a few on this map that don't actually have programs right now, but anywhere that's in the EU, the European Economic Area, or the Schengen area. There are a few Western Balkans that are also included, and the UK is still included in this, even though we are post-Brexit. The 3 most common, I don't believe this is in the correct order anymore, but France, Spain, and Germany. And I think there are upwards of 160 different programs right now. So each country has many, many, in each city within that country. I believe Paris has 42 or 43 programs that you can pass through Paris in. So for the past 20 years, this past fall, they had the 20-year Erasmus Mundus anniversary. So every 4 years, there's a different funding cycle. So now it's called Erasmus Plus. You can, if you look into data in the past, you'll see that names have changed slightly, but every 5 years, they completely redo the funding scheme to better support the students that are coming for this program. This is only for funded students. So up until 2021, the EU did not gather a single thing about students that weren't receiving the scholarship, because it is an all or nothing fellowship scholarship, and they didn't understand how valuable at the time was it to gather information on students choosing to pay these institutions rather than receive the money. But now they do gather more information on both. And Amanda and I are working closely with our EU delegation, so that EU ambassador to the US and their Office of Education, to better understand how to support students like you guys that are interested in Erasmus Mundus.
All right, so this QR code is actually a link to our link tree. Oh, I don't know what just happened. So if you guys want to scan it, it has a couple of important links, one of which is our question and answer document. It has all of our socials, our email, and also a list of all of the current Erasmus Mundus programs, which there are 203 currently. So there's plenty to browse and see if there's anything of interest for you guys. Yeah, so the most popular programs are the Europub Health, which I think is the one that Jordan just graduated from. Anyone in medical sciences or anyone interested in something like that, that is the program that is the most popular for that reason. We also have higher education, sports ethics, public policy, law and econ, and I'm doing marine science. There's literally a program for everything, even wine tourism and neuroscience. So literally any interest, you probably have a program that will fit your needs. So I would definitely explore the program page. And when you're working on your applications, it's suggested to pick the top 5 that you're interested in and really just focus on those programs. If we can go to the next slide. Or I guess applications is later, but here are some reasons why you should do an Erasmus Mundus program. As we mentioned before, you get to study in multiple countries, usually 2 to 4, depending on the program. There are opportunities to be a fully funded master, but even if you don't get the fully funded scholarship, it is still a much more affordable option compared to United States master's programs or even other countries. I know for me, I'm a self-funded student, and it is literally a quarter of the price of any of the programs I looked at in the States. So I still think it's worth considering, even if you don't get that initial scholarship email. So just, make sure to check that one out. Some other incentives for this program are that it really improves intercultural communication and a diverse learning environment. If you're really looking for a career in international studies or something with just more culture and diversity, then this is definitely a good opportunity to expose yourself to that. Some other pros are learning and practicing other languages, networking with world-renowned professors and other students that have had different life experiences. Some people don't come straight out of their bachelor. Some people have 10 years of working and have started NGOs and have done crazy stuff before they come back to a master's program. So it's definitely a good opportunity to meet people from all different walks of life. And additionally, it's really fun. You get to meet a lot of people that you're going to stay connected with for the rest of your life. You're going to get to travel and explore places that you wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to in the States. Plus, it's just fun to live in Europe and experience something else for 2 years. Yeah. So back to what I was talking about application-wise, you get to choose 5 programs tops, but we usually recommend to focus on your top 1 or 2 choices just to make sure you submit a really good, complete application for those 2 prioritized programs. And usually during your application, you apply for your pathways and countries that you would like to study in during your application. So once you get accepted and admitted, it's usually not probable to change that. So just, really consider the application. That's why we recommend to start really early and assess all of the steps and really just make sure you want to do this country, then this country, then this country, and this pathway. Usually it's different in the different places you get to study. So there's a lot of facets to each application. So definitely start early, familiarize yourself. And like I said, it's a little overwhelming. So try to pick your 1 or 2 most interesting ones, and then you can submit some others as well if you're just not sure you want to commit to just 1 or 2 programs. You're also sometimes allowed to do it in Spanish or French, but you do have to take language proficiency tests if you want to study in another language. So just make sure you get that as soon as you can and upload it with your application materials. However, most of the programs are taught entirely in English, so do not stress about being proficient in another language. It is fun to learn another language when you're studying abroad, but it is not a requirement. Everyone in your program will be speaking English. As far as the application requirements go, you're going to need a couple of letters of recommendation. It's really good to get 1 academic, 1 professional, and 1 related to your field. I know sometimes the professional and field related ones can overlap a little, but just make sure you have a good variety. You don't want all 3 coming from professors or all 3 coming from your high school job opportunities. You want to have a good variety showing your variety as a student as well. And really think about the context of past, present, and future when you're writing your actual essay. Think about what you've done, what you're currently doing, what you want to do. And that just helps you have a nice little scope for your essay. And you need to focus on why the program needs you and why you would be a good candidate for the program. That's a good ending paragraph, in my opinion. And if you have any international experience already, that's always an asset and will definitely help you in the application process as well. I just saw a question pop up. I know Heidi's answering some of them, but it's usually 2 to 3 recommendation letters on each of the Erasmus applications.
Each program does have their own webpage with their own specific application guidelines, more or less. It is the same, several letters of rec, I think 3 max, but 2 are required. A letter of motivation, your CV. And then mine, for example, I did my first year only in Spanish. So I had to provide from USC's language department proof that I was at a B2 level or higher. I do believe that they have made that much more strict in terms of what you need for different languages, but very few programs do require language proof, as most, like Amanda said, are done in English. And very similar to the upside down pyramid that Heidi shared earlier, these programs, for example, my program received 1,400 applications for 20 spots this past year. That is the most popular. So most programs do not receive that many, but it really does depend on the type and what specific interests you have, which pathway you're choosing. And I really tailored all of my application based on what pathway. So I chose the second year specialization in governance and health law and leadership. So I made sure that everything on my CV and everything in my letters of rec were based on, health policy, leadership in the field, things like that. And I believe Amanda did something very similar.
Yeah, relevant references are really important. That's the main thing I have to say. I'm doing a marine science master. I didn't pick my calculus professor to write me the letter of recommendation. I picked my professors that I had very hands-on projects with. I worked for the NPS last summer, so I got one of my bosses to write me a letter of recommendation. It's just very close relationships with people who know you and will write you a good recommendation letter, but make sure they're also relevant. Don't pick a random person.
And I know the next question a lot of people ask is, how does it factor in? How does everything factor in? The EU doesn't report literally any statistic as compared to how open admissions offices are in the States. So it is a little difficult. But for my program, for example, the letters of rec aren't factored into the rubric score, but they are very heavily considered when they're thinking about what kind of person would fit into the very unique dynamics of a 40-person international group that lives together abroad for 2 years. But I know in other programs, letters of rec are very heavily weighted. So it really depends.
Yeah. And I know on the last slideshow, if you guys attended that presentation, I suggested, if you don't have any super close relationships with your professors, to set up a meeting with them during office hours. Bring your resume, have a little chat with them, tell them what your goals are, what you're interested in, why their class plays a role into it. And 9 times out of 10, they'll be more than willing to help you out. They write letters of recommendation for so many students every year. So don't feel overwhelmed or stressed if you don't have that close personal relationship with a professor. There are ways around it. You just have to put in a little bit of work and go to their office hours and have a little chat with them to see if they're willing to do it for you. So that's a suggestion as well. I know it can be a little stressful, especially if you're taking classes where there's 400 students in the room. I know it's hard to make that personal connection. But yeah, that's about it for application tips.
And I see there's a question about past, present, future. That's by no means any sort of requirement. That was our suggestion on how to write a letter of motivation, as there are very few words. I think 400 to 500 was the max for Europub Health, and you had to explain all of these things in this 400-word letter. So I was told by the program that the letters they like most are, what have I done? What am I doing now? And what do I want to do? And making sure that every step of that pathway, I talked about how this specific program needs me and how I need this specific program.
Yeah, these are all just suggestions. The requirements are pretty open for all the Erasmus programs I've applied to anyway. It's basically just give us a personal statement, give us your resume, give us your letters of recommendation. So if you're really into creative writing and you don't want to do the past, present, future model, feel free to ignore that. It is just a suggestion that we have been told is successful.
Yeah, and that's another place where you can tap into the fellowship resources at your university, because those are going to be folks that can help read over your application, so you can help you really articulate in writing these types of connections that you see between yourself, your program, and why you're a good fit. And Jordan and Amanda, were you interviewed for your program, or was it selected specifically based on your written application?
I was not, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Amanda.
Sorry, I applied to 3 Erasmus programs, and I wasn't interviewed for this one, but the other one I was accepted for. I did have like 2 personal interviews with like all of the coordinators for the program. So that's another possibility. You might have to talk to people in person and demonstrate your need for scholarship. That's what my interview was for a scholarship assessment. Others just give you like a job interview essentially to see if you're a good fit for the program, but not all of them require it.
Mine did not, but I suggested that when they rewrote the funding policy that they add interviews. So now they do.
Oh, nice. Great.
You want interviews is really the goal for this.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, and I do see some questions again about kind of different requirements and things in the chat. So each of these programs is going to have slightly different requirements. And so you'll want to read through the program directory carefully and your program in particular, kind of understanding what are the specific requirements for your program of interest. And again, connecting with your fellowships advisor to help you understand those if you have questions or to help you work on them. Sometimes there are video essays. That's kind of a newer thing that's been popping up in fellowships. So video essays, personal statements, letters of motivation, interviews, they all have different components. So your mileage may vary on which of those are applicable to you.
I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So if y'all want to go through these questions, then folks can keep putting questions in the chat. I know we did have one about funding, and Amanda, this might be one for you, especially since you're a self-funded student. But as a self-funded student, where did you find additional funding if you did? Did you take advantage of loans or scholarships, grants, or do you have suggestions of where to look for outside funding? I'll let you do that, and then I have a couple of ideas, but let you go first.
Sure. Yeah. Honestly, the self-funding program, like I said, is just like a fraction of the price of the United States offered master's programs. So I like as of now haven't had the need to have outside funding in addition to that. Like I've just been working. So I've been just paying for it out of my bank account essentially. But I know that Erasmus does offer like separate semester grants and mobility grants, which are eligible to apply for after your first semester. So it's like that's something that I'm going to do. And I know that there are other grants offered through like USC or like other institutions. I just haven't, I don't have any additional funding sources. But it's much more doable than like probably what you're thinking of like cost wise compared to other programs. So there's definitely options. I just don't have much advice for them.
And when you say, oh, I was gonna say, when you say you're working, are you working in your country that you're living in?
Yeah. With the visa that I have, you're allowed to work 20 hours. It's part-time. That obviously doesn't cover everything, but it does like help pay for living costs and food. And I just had a couple, like I had a savings account, but nothing crazy. It's still like completely doable just on a part-time salary as well. But that's also a lot. If you don't want to study and work at the same time, I definitely would recommend going the scholarship route, at least trying and applying for stuff.
In some, for example, my first year was in Spain. They do not allow you to work in very big letters. It says cannot work on this visa, but nothing says you can't do your own thing online. I had a lot of classmates. Most of my classmates were MDs already. A lot of them kind of moonlighted at a clinic once a week. We didn't have a lot of class, and all of ours was online due to COVID. So most people saved lots of money in the very inexpensive first city I was in. When I moved to Paris, obviously things changed a little bit, but I even met a student who graduated from the University of Georgia that went on one of those online scholarship databases and applied to, she said, about 100 little ones. So repeating the same essay over and over, and she managed to gain about $50,000 worth of little scholarships that added up to pay for her 2 years. And I know I got one for my sorority that they sent
Wow.
directly to my program, and the program gave it to me as like an extra monthly stipend. So many different ways to reduce the cost if you don't get the scholarship. But though, as I mentioned, my program specifically and some of the more popular ones do have a lot more competitiveness for scholarship. Many other programs have scholarships that aren't filled because they don't have as much visibility. So for example, I'm seeing the space med that's a newer program, might not nearly be as visible as like a law and economics focused program. So if you want to increase your chances of getting funded, always good to look at some of the more unique or specialized topics, because those definitely are looking for more US passport holders as well. And
And I will say,
go ahead, sorry.
sorry. I was just gonna say another plug for your fellowships team, helping you to find funding, because there are some that can fund maybe portions of your program as well. So like Germany, for example, has the DAAD study scholarship, which I'm not sure exactly how it would interact with Erasmus Mundus, but that can fund graduate study in Germany, which fun fact, anyone thinking of graduate school, public schools in Germany don't actually charge tuition. So if you want to go and get a tuition-free master's degree, Germany's your place to go. You can also potentially do things like Fulbright and use Fulbright to fund part of your program. There are many creative ways you can fund that. And there actually are resources if you go onto the FAFSA website that tell you which universities internationally will accept US student loan programs. There's some that will defer your student loans while you're enrolled at an institution. Some of them aren't a part of the scheme, but other ones will potentially allow you to take out educational loans to put towards those degree programs. So there are a lot of options for funding outside of Erasmus Mundus. Erasmus Mundus is just the joint master's program funding scheme is just a really great one. But there are definitely a lot of them. I want to know which fellowships and scholarships that University of Georgia student was tapping into, because that's amazing.
And I do see
Yeah.
some more questions in terms of funding. Last I checked, which I believe the current funding cycle for Erasmus Mundus Plus programs doesn't in 2027, and then they'll rewrite for another 7 years how they have it. But programs do bigger programs, for example, mine, again, that had 40 people per cohort, max 20 were scholarship students. And that's not because there are only 20 scholarship slots. That's because the program is given X amount of money for scholarships for the 7-year funding cycle. And they have to decide, divide that by 7 and then figure out how many students they can fund fully, because it is kind of an all or nothing with the Erasmus Mundus Excellence Scholarship. They fund your tuition and give you monthly stipends, which now I believe it is 1,400 euro a month for the 2 years or the year and a half, depending on your program. But the other half of that, if it's a bigger program where the scholarship applications could all be filled with slots, they do have to be 50%. And it is difficult in that they don't have to post any of this information. They don't have to post their admission statistics, but many programs do have, like I mentioned, an Erasmus Mundus representative and the coordinator that you can hopefully get more information on their specific program if you contact them.
And we have another question, which actually I've run into myself, but someone asks, when looking at programs, I've seen requirements for certified copies. If you dealt with this, did you have to get a passport copy, internship certificate notarized, or anything like that? I've seen kind of other kind of evidence that requires notarization. And then a separate question, how did you navigate cultural differences and language barriers?
So I was lucky since I lived in Atlanta, to find an office. I think it was an immigration attorney who had someone whose sole purpose was to notarize and apostille documents. So not only did you have to get a lot notarized, which was just a stamp, but then you had to get the Hague apostille, which is like an international notarization on all of those notarized documents. So it was a little bit of a hassle, but I literally Googled, where can I get this apostille in Atlanta, Georgia? And I think I paid $100 for total for about 50 or 60 things that needed this. So I got multiple copies of everything just to be safe, hence why it was 50 plus documents. But I know there is an option to send it off for free, or you can send it to the US Embassy of wherever you're trying to go for your first year institution. But I highly recommend, if you're able to find someone to do it privately, because it takes way less time. And I took that exact same document to all of the places I've applied for visas for. And in terms of the second question, then I'll let Amanda give her thoughts on it as well. Since I did my first year entirely in Spanish, it was very, very much a rude awakening. I thought, oh, I'm taking all these Spanish courses, I will totally know Spanish. When you're thrown in to do a higher education degree totally in a different language, you very much do face, I wouldn't say a barrier, but you're hit kind of full frontal with it immediately. But then in the classes that we had in English, my appreciation for how much harder my classmates had to work to be on the same level as me, a native mother tongue English speaker, to understand the same topics, high level law based topics that we were doing in English, even though they weren't mother tongue English speakers. My appreciation and understanding for the global learning environment has developed tenfold. And now I am in medical school, though it's in English. I had my entire clinical exam yesterday in Italian. And I know intimately now what it could be a barrier of a language. That's now an opportunity for me to have much more profound understanding of other people in this environment.
What a good answer. Yeah, my answer to the twofold question. My program did not require certified copies of anything. So it definitely depends on the program as far as that goes. So don't freak out hearing $100 legal fees. And as far as visa applications go, I just brought my whole stack of papers straight to the embassy. They took everything, no problem, no additional fee. So it definitely depends on the program. If they're asking for that certified copy, you do have to go through those extra hoops. But if they're just asking for you to get your visa to go to this country legally, then you don't have to stress about getting 100 things notarized. So just definitely read between the lines on those applications and programs that you're looking at. It definitely depends. But it's not something you have to freak out about unless you know for sure your program requires it. And as far as cultural differences goes, my program is completely taught in English, so it's not a huge deal when it comes to like classes. I'm not learning really difficult scientific things in a different language. But as far as like cultural immersion goes, like in a city that's not like very well known for English speaking outside of my program, it is a little difficult to like connect with the local populations. But because there's such a big network of like Erasmus students, it's like so easy to make friends and like connect with people. And the language barrier is not that big of a barrier if you really like. I don't know French at all. I took Spanish all through high school and college, and I am in France. Somehow I ended up here. And I'm fine. I have so many friends. I hang out. I go to the bar, order my pain au chocolat every morning. Like I am chill. You're going to have a great time. And you're going to pick stuff up when you're here. You don't have to speak a language fluently to interact with people and like go to the grocery store or to a restaurant or anything. But it can be difficult at times. It just completely depends on your situation again.
Many programs do offer, I don't believe any are required, but many programs do offer optional language courses. So if you're in France and you don't speak French, I would say most programs do have some sort of, whether it's through the program or separately, suggestions on how to improve your language. Most everyone, if they had the option in my program, did it, which was also very helpful.
yeah, it's an option for me too. I'm just going to Italy and Portugal after this, so I'm going to focus more on the ones closer to Spanish. But yes, it is an option, so that's also something you don't have to stress about. I'm just trying to be comforting and reassuring for people that might be freaking out about this. It's going to be okay.
And I did see another question. I saw that Heidi answered it as well. But for those of you who didn't see it, Sylvia asked, very good question. How do you request funding? There is a separate application, or not separate application. There's an application deadline prior to the regular application deadline if you're interested in the scholarship, but there is nothing additional you do except submit it more or less in January rather than in May. And it isn't need-based. So I know Amanda said that she did have an interview about financial demonstration of need, but for better or for worse, depending on where your situation is, this is not a needs-based scholarship. So most of the students in my cohort that received a scholarship were from LMICs, and they thought it was actually quite odd that people not from LMICs were given the scholarship. But the more we learned about it, the way that each program picks their students to be funded is about creating a cohesive group that is only going to further the group's, unique learning environment. I know that sounds very higher education buzzwordy, but I mean it when I say that this is probably the most holistic application selection that I have ever seen. And that is in the best way possible. So though you might not be able to demonstrate that you can only get accepted and do this program if you get the scholarship, there are definitely ways to portray that. But I would caution you against making that your whole essay, because it is about you as a student, how you are going to fit into the program, not that you as a student need money to do the program, if that makes sense.
It is also completely dependent on the program again. But the one that I did have the interview for was able to give me like a tuition reduction. So that's also an option. Like if you get accepted and don't get the full scholarship, they may be able to like reduce your fees a little bit if you like talk to the coordinator after you get your acceptance letter and just discuss the opportunities that way. They likely won't be able to waive it entirely, but they did like cut it in half, I believe. So it's still, there are still options to like reduce the amount of fees you'll have to pay as a US citizen going to Europe. So just keep that in mind as well. There's still, you could email people after you get your decision. But yeah, on my applications, it was literally just check a box if you're interested in a scholarship, nothing extra, just focus on your personal statement and what you can bring to the program. Being unique is probably a big standout for the scholarship point of view in that front.
Yeah, and so Sylvia, to answer your second question, I apologize for not being clear prior, but most programs, and they should have all of their updated information on each specific website. Those websites you can find on the catalog that's on the QR, and they do all have their own application platform. And if you submit it, it's usually the second week of January when the scholarship application is due. So it is the same exact application, but like Amanda said, you check a box. I think in my program, it was opposite. It was everyone was applying if they submitted it prior to January 13th for also the scholarship. And I checked a box saying, I'm also interested in self-funded admission. And if you didn't get accepted with the scholarship at that point, then you were either offered self-funded admission or they put you back in the pool of applicants for those who didn't submit their application by the scholarship consideration deadline. And then I believe you had until May or June. My advice is, no one's going to say no to free money. So if you have the ability to submit even if it's your top 1 or 2 applications by their scholarship deadline, You usually hear back, I think within 7 to 8 weeks is the cutoff time for those. And then you can decide what to do. You know, better to have options than not.
Should we go through or like predetermined questions? Just yeah, okay. Do you want to take the first couple, Jordan, and I can take the last couple? I know you were more
Yes.
familiar
So
with those.
obviously, very much, once again, I know it gets tiring to hear, depends on the program, but in the case where there are 203 different topics, it is very much dependent. Obviously, you can't, if it's a very specific degree like law, you know, even states have different bar exams. So you might not be able to immediately, without any additional paperwork, apply your European law masters to the US. However, most are, you know, MPH is what I have, MSs, MAs, those are all transferable back to the States. And if it's a more clinical one, I know there's a clinical psychology based degree, there is additional paperwork if you want to take this master's from Europe back into the States as a clinical practice degree, but it is possible. There are, as you saw, 1,028 funded US alumni. And there are many more non-US passport holders, alumni of Erasmus Mundus, that have now moved to the States to work with the same degrees. So most people do return to the States with their degree at some point. I know also a good amount from my years that are still in Europe, some of which never plan to leave, some will, but it is a easily transferable program. You're not going to some random small college that no one's ever heard of. In the Netherlands, you're going to big institutions that have connections in the States. Many of our professors were from the States as well, from institutions like USC, like some of the other SEC institutions that you guys are at. And if that is a very specific concern about your topic, I do highly suggest reaching out to the coordinators of the programs and just explaining your situation. Many people do stay in Europe, as I mentioned. I know France offers like a 1-year job search visa, so you can pretty easily extend your student visa 12 months additionally without having to provide proof of work. You just had to provide that I graduated and I'm looking. And I know the Netherlands also offers it as well. Portugal has a lot looser restrictions. Italy and Spain, not as much, but if you want to stay over here, there are plenty of places you can do so. Heidi, go ahead, Amanda, sorry.
Sorry, I was just thinking we covered the scholarship question. As US citizens, everyone will need a visa to travel to Europe for a 2-year, 1.5-year program. Usually you get that at the first country that you're supposed to go to is the one that you would apply for your visa in. And then depending on your situation, if you're going to like Ireland or something, you would need a separate one because or not Ireland, sorry, England, because they're not in the EU. It just depends. But for the most part, you will need at least one visa to do the program. And there are plenty of resources online. That's something that we could probably help steer you in the right direction of, get you connected to the right resources as well if you want to reach out to us via email. There's also plenty of other institutions and people that can answer questions and help you like get sorted with that, because it is a very complicated process in most cases. But there are people that can help you for sure. And difficulty level of getting into, sorry.
Oh, Amanda, sorry, I had a question on the visas. Did your program help you with that at all, or was that all things that you did independently to secure your visa for each location?
I actually just did mine completely by myself. It's pretty straightforward going from the US to France at least. I know some of my friends had some difficulties getting a Spanish visa just because of the time constraints. They're a little bit slower with processing their paperwork. It's not necessarily more complicated process wise. But if you're in a time crunch, then that could be something to consider as well. So definitely recommendation is start your visa process as early as you can. Um, but it really wasn't that complicated. They would always email you with like the next steps. It was just like kind of a lot of steps to stay on top of when you're not really familiar with that process. But they do have
Mhm.
resources like at each of the programs that should be able to like give you information and help you with that. Um, right now, I'm
I
like help with my residence permit, so it's still like an ongoing process, and they are very helpful. But I figured mine out by myself.
I actually used USC's International Student Office.
Mm,
So I
perfect.
said, what do I do? Help me. And they were very helpful as they'd obviously sent many students abroad before to Spain. I had to apply for a different visa every country I went,
Hmm.
entirely separate of the previous one. But yeah, the program has the resources, and most of the resources that you need for the visa, the program actually has to give you. So they are with support letters, and many people do ask, like, why does me needing a visa in any way inhibit my chances of getting the scholarship? Absolutely not, because out of the 80 people in my large cohort, I think there were 2 EU citizens. So that meant, 78 people needed visas. So absolutely not. Um, Thankfully, as US passport holders, you can go for 89 days to your European country prior to your visa being necessary, unless specifically stated that you need it prior. So mine was during COVID, so I needed proof to fly that I had a visa. However, most people I know submit their paperwork as fast as they can. For Spain, it was 89 days prior to my day of program start. And I was able to get it processed, and then you can fly waiting for the visa, and most places allow you to pick it up when you get to that country. It is very country dependent. I know in Italy now I had, 7 days from when I arrived to provide proof that I was here and that I was staying and that I had the financial means to do so. But in Spain, I believe to get my residence permit, it took 7 months. So it really, really depends, but you're also not the only one
Mhm.
doing it. So
Yeah,
find solace in that.
great. And one last visa question, and then we have quite a few coming through in the chat that we'll turn to. But did you have to return to the US to do any of that visa processing, or once you were in Europe, you were able to stay and get everything done from there?
I had to fly to Miami to the embassy in person. That again, I think was a weird COVID rule. Hopefully all of those, this was in the beginning of COVID, so nothing had been altered
Mm,
yet. Hopefully, because of the online shift that we had to do during that period of time, it is a lot easier. Again, very dependent on where you're going. Most people I know did return to the States for the summer because I think we had 3 or 4 months. And if you can't work or you don't want to work and you want to save money, most people did return. But overall, there are documents and offices that will help you. You just have to be very diligent in the details because they, process so many documents. If one thing's wrong, they'll just send you to the back of the line and you'll have to restart.
okay, thank you. And there are quite a few kind of procedural questions in the chat, so we'll go through those quickly and then a little bit more of the bigger picture questions. So do you know if you are accepted for Erasmus Mundus for 1 year, are you able to defer to the next year? And if so, can you keep the funding if you do?
Again, program dependent.
Mm,
I did have some classmates that wanted to bring their family. If for any of you that have legal partners or children, you are able to bring them on your visa, but keep in mind you don't get any additional funding to do so. So
mhm.
Most people don't, but it is possible. In that case, you are eligible to defer if you need multiple documents. Again, for Spain, if you lived anywhere longer than 6 months for the previous 5 years, you had to provide a legalized document of a background check in the native language of that country. So I had classmates that moved around a lot and had to find those documents from each country. So they were allowed to defer, but it is not common, and I definitely wouldn't bank on it. And generally, if you do defer, you do lose your scholarship slot.
It's the same
Good to
for
know.
my program anyway. We've had a couple of people defer due to like health concerns or like because they were counting on the scholarship and didn't receive it. And usually deferring is allowed, at least in my program and the ones I've heard about. They will hold your slot essentially until next year, but the funding does not carry over. So if you're a scholarship student and choose that you're not ready yet and you want to come back next year, they either just take the money back or give it to someone else depending on the timeline. So you don't get to keep the money.
And in the circumstance where you weren't awarded, but then you defer, would you be considered for scholarship again, or would you need to reapply?
Depending.
Depends. It's the most common answer for any fellowship is it depends. So your mileage may vary. Wonderful. And then what happens if you get accepted to 2 or more programs?
They're not actually connected. So unless the people happen to know each other personally, they have no idea that you're applying to multiple. You don't actually have a limit to application numbers anymore. That is brand new, but we say 5 because
Okay.
it used to be 3 and that was a hard cutoff. But again, they don't talk to each other. I highly caution against applying to more than 5 though. But for example, I applied to 3. I heard back from this one first, said you have 1 week to decide. And if not, you lose your funding. You don't lose your slot. And they either decided to give it to the person on a wait list, which you don't know you're on this wait list. You just find out that you've been awarded because someone said no. Or I would lose my spot entirely. But again, very much dependent on the program.
Yeah. And a question about citizenship and eligibility. What are dual citizens eligible for Erasmus Mundus if they have eligibility even within a European country?
They'll ask you, I think,
Yeah.
just to state every passport that you hold. And it used to be that EU passport holders, no matter what other thing you held, would get less money, but they did away with that because they were trying to make it much more fair across the board. And you're not considered, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to ask if it mattered if you applied under an American passport or a European passport.
The only, and I don't believe I wrote this down, so my apologies, but the only quota that exists is in each program, no more than 3 people from the same passport nation can receive the scholarship.
Okay.
So that is
that
the
includes
only
like American passport holders as well.
Yes. But I know we're a very big country with a lot of people that want masters, but we are, I think, 35 or 40th in terms of number of people applying for Erasmus Mundus scholarships. So there might be a lot of us, but there are not a lot of us applying for these masters.
Okay.
The other thing I would like to say about that is, at least for the ones that I applied to, outside of the EU, the tuition costs are usually double than inside the EU. So if you're not counting on getting the scholarship or you're just applying after January, I would definitely use your EU passport because you get significant tuition reduction just from being within the EU. However, if you want to take a shot at getting the scholarship and you think there are more than 3 people applying from your European country than the American passport, then that's completely up to your discretion. based on that statistic. But just so you know, tuition costs are usually much lower for European citizens.
Thank you for that. And to revisit the timeline, so again, these timelines are going to vary based on which programs you're applying for. And the question is also like, when do you apply? So for USC, you can apply for this basically as soon as the fall, spring of your senior year and beyond. USC actually supports alumni applicants as well. So if you are a USC student and you want to work with the National Fellowships team, you're an alum and you're not enrolled in another institution. If you're part of another graduate program, we'd probably send you there first for support. But if you're not connected to another institution, you can work with us as a USC alum basically forever. We'll help support you. And I don't think, does Erasmus Mundus have an age cutoff?
No, I had classmates that were almost triple my age.
Okay, perfect. So yes, basically forever you are eligible after you graduate with your bachelor's degree, and USC is here to help you forever.
And I know that coming from the States, it is more common to go straight from undergrad to a master's, but in other countries, that's not the case at all. So I think I was one of 2 or 3 fresh graduates. Most people had worked, had obtained several other masters. I had classmates that had PhDs and then wanted to come back and do the masters because they felt like it. So very diverse and age range as well. So don't at all think that you're at a disadvantage for that. I think you might actually be at an advantage because you've never left the academic environment. So I did apply, I believe Amanda as well, fall, early spring semester. They are supposed to let you know my program within 7 weeks of the day you submit. So I found out the day I was driving home for my senior spring break. I did have only 1 week to decide, but many programs do offer you more time, but you can't really wait for all 3 programs you have applied to hear back and kind of see which is going to offer you the most. Tuitions might differ, but if you're offered the scholarship in more than one program, the monthly stipend is the same. So if you get accepted, you hear back from one and it is one that you want and you receive good news from them, I highly recommend saying yes. Because if need be later, then you can say no, but you can't say no and then say yes.
Good advice. And I know also some folks may be applying for multiple different awards. So if, for example, you're applying for Fulbright and for Erasmus Mundus, you'll probably will hear from Erasmus Mundus first. So you may have to make a decision between awards as well. So just know that kind of going into the process that those are some situations you might find yourself in. But again, it's much, much better to have too many opportunities than to not have any.
And I did have some classmates. One was deciding between Rotary and Erasmus. One decided between Fulbright and Erasmus. It turned out that Fulbright and Rotary weren't offering as much money as Erasmus in this case. So they did choose it. Of course, 3 very different profiles of fellowships as well, offering entirely different things. So very much dependent on you. But I highly recommend applying to as many as you feel you can, because if you go specifically through USC's Fulbright process, it is incredibly rigorous, but I learned more about how to talk about myself in an essay than I'll probably ever learn in anything ever. So take advantage of those, even if it's a long shot. Like for me, there was no way I was going to make it to the national competition of the Fulbright for the Netherlands, but I learned a lot in the process.
Thank you. Yeah. And again, we're here to help. So we help you discover yourself, discover how to write about yourself, and hopefully get funding somewhere in the process. So other questions. So did you find it difficult to maintain professional connections while you were abroad? And what helped or hindered your efforts to do this? And how did it impact your ability to enter the workforce? Well, maybe you haven't come back to the United States, but maybe you have friends who know. But how does it impact your ability to enter into the workforce?
I obviously I'm still in school and I'm not in the US, but most people I know that have come back, it was, as obviously the US is growing increasingly more diverse as well, this type of program not only obviously offers you 2 masters, but it offers you immeasurable amounts of soft skills that you, if you know how to talk about and market them, these are super helpful in any sort of professional connection and job. So I had a lot of American classmates that came back to the States and already had jobs lined up from when they were talking with internships in the second semester of their second year. We had visiting professors from the States and from all over the world the whole time. And anytime any of us would go back for holidays or for summer, we were able to say, hey, look, I'm doing this really unique and diverse public health program. Chances are that few others applying for the same job had had this unique 53 nationality classroom experience talking about COVID-19 that I did. And that will only augment your connections. Of course, if you know how to talk about it. So one of the things Erasmus Mundus Association is really working on right now is helping students know how to market themselves after an Erasmus Mundus degree. Because how in the world do you talk about this unique international experience in a few bullet points on a CV? So we're working on helping you know how to do that. Celeste, you are not alone. Most people applying as a senior, I submitted a document saying, of course, you submit your transcript that says when you're supposed to graduate and how many credits you need to graduate. And I got the registrar at South Carolina to kind of literally write a few lines on a sheet of paper that I submitted saying, like, Jordan is on track to graduate in May of 2025. And I was still granted the scholarship on a conditional, you have to send us your document as soon as you graduate. And that applies also to self-funded students as well.
Yeah, I think there's actually a form you can fill out on USC's website now. You just ask them for like digital verification, like officially.
Verification of enrollment form. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what I submitted, and they took it, and then I just submitted my degree when I got that. It's not a problem.
Mark, your next question. It is not on a rolling basis if you've applied for the scholarship deadline. So they'll wait they're 7 to 8 weeks, and then they'll email you with you've either been given the scholarship, granted self-funded admission, or neither. And then from then on, I think every 2 or 3 weeks, they'll decide if you are to be admitted as a self-funded student. And there are several payment plan options. You don't have to decide in a week if you're a self-funded student either. So it's a lot looser and they're far more understanding. I know for my program, you can divide instead of one lump sum for the tuition, you can divide it into 7 or 8 payments as long as you prove that you can pay it in the future and that you have a plan to do so. What is the next question?
Other questions, keep them coming. I think we're actually maybe at the end of the ones that have been in the chat. But I guess maybe for a question from me is, what was the most valuable piece of advice you wish you would have heard while you were considering applying?
That's a
Or
hard
what
one.
do you wish you had known? Yeah.
I think for me, I wish there was more information on how to go about like the visa application process. I feel like they have a lot of resources for just students in general, but like it's not as obvious for people coming from outside of the EU, like all of the legal steps you have to take to get there. In the end, I'm okay, but like it's very stressful, especially like going into it blind if you don't know the resources to contact. So that's something I wish I knew, but I guess that was like upon acceptance and not while I was applying, but still something I wish I knew ahead of time.
I honestly don't know. I was thankful to have gone to USC's fellowship office. I connected with them, I think, end of freshman year when I said, I want to do something abroad before med school. And they said, okay, like, here's this long list of things you can try for. And at the time, 2 students before me had applied to an Erasmus Mundus program, neither of which received a scholarship or went. So I was kind of the first one that, also a different Amanda, but my year, applied to another program, Erasmus Mundus, also got funded. Neither of us knew each other, knew we were doing this, but slowly but surely, more and more people have found out that it's actually a pretty easy application compared to pretty much anything else. An amazing thing, no one's talked about it yet, but no application fees and no test requirement. So I know that the GRE has been done away with in many masters. However, here there's nothing of that. The only test you might have to prove is if you wish to do something in another language. So not limiting factors whatsoever. And the great thing is you don't have to pay for them. So I wish I guess I wish I could go back and do another one. Unfortunately, you can't get funded for a second Erasmus Mundus Masters, but
you can do multiple if you do want
correct.
self-funded.
And you can apply for fellowships. So
Exactly. It's different funding. Yeah. And I will say, kind of to Jordan's point about the increasing knowledge of and also success with Erasmus Mundus, we actually have 2 USC students on the same Erasmus Mundus program right now, both funded. The merged program. They're both in Copenhagen. So yeah, so 2 of the 3 American students on that program are from USC. Yeah, they're
And
both
for
great.
some, yeah, like USC was really, I was very connected. There's even several girls from my sorority that joined the same program as me. So very connected on that front. And there's one other school from the US that produces a lot of students, and then pretty much the rest. So USC, I know not all of you may be from South Carolina, but we are leading the pack in terms of producing Erasmus Mundus scholars. And that's really cool because I know that I even chose USC because of the heavy emphasis on the global Carolina aspect. And I think I was friends with mostly international students for my 4 years. So I still have those connections. So if you are really interested in this program, reach out to the International Student Office and see. I was a buddy. I led cooking classes for people learning English. I befriended them. I drove them to Target when they needed to get a pillow the first day they arrived. I picked them up from the airport. Invaluable connections, because now I had friends in all of the cities I was going to that studied at South Carolina. So they helped me with language. They stored my luggage when I was scammed out of an apartment. They completely saved my life in numerous cases. And I have some amazing connections to share from it. And they know about this type of program. They know about Erasmus in general, which is inter-Europe study abroad. So they know how to advise you and really help you. Use them as a resource as well.
Wonderful. And I think the question about proficiency just got answered in the chat, but I wanted to say we have about 9 minutes left. So I wanted to encourage folks, if you have questions, to ask them, to put them in the chat. And I will also put up our contact information. So I have my contact information, Jordan and Amanda's, so you can get in touch with any and or all of us. If you have questions maybe you think of later. I know Amanda, since you're and Jordan, you've both been to Paris, so like l'esprit d'escalier, the staircase wit, where you kind of think of things as you're leaving a place. So I will put up our contact information in case you want to get in touch with us. And then as I do that, the question is the master's program research-based or have a thesis option for those who plan to pursue PhDs in the future and require research experience? So talking a little bit about the research aspects of those programs.
Thesis
Yeah,
is required.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thesis is required. There are a couple of programs that are a Master of Research as well. So if you really want a research heavy based option, you could go for something like that. But all of the programs, as far as I know, require your last semester to be just complete thesis. So you will get your research experience. Sometimes they offer internships as well. I know my program has an 8-week internship built into it where they like literally give you options for an internship. So it's not like, which is also a huge asset. I know a lot of programs do that as well. And I know sometimes it can be hard to get that volunteer experience before you enter the work field. So that's another pro that I've found in Erasmus programs compared to the ones that I was looking at in the States. So keep that in mind as well.
Most, I think, yeah, most people, I say most because it's the highest singular percentage. I would say 40-something%, I believe, was the newest statistic of graduates from my program went on to pursue PhDs. So I mentioned way in the beginning, Erasmus Mundus used to have EMJD, so Erasmus Mundus Joint Doctorates. Now all of the doctorates have been shifted to Marie Curie doctorates, which is basically an Erasmus Mundus, but a PhD. It is a pretty easy pipeline from European masters to international PhD. And this program is any of these programs, this entire Erasmus Mundus thing is very highly regarded when you want to go for a PhD because you've done the international thing, you've worked with people and professors from all over the world, and since every program has this consortium of international partners, you have that entire arsenal at your disposal to connect with them, do research with them, et cetera, et cetera. Study abroad experience. I'm not going to say it helps or hurts. I don't think those words are necessarily the best fit in this case. It's a tricky line. So they want to hear, obviously, that you are a person that can live in a different country for 2 years and work with people who are different than you, but they don't want to hear that you've lived abroad for 18 years, traveled all of Europe, and don't necessarily have anything to gain from 2 more years of international experience. So back in one of the other slides, we did talk about, and I kind of used that's why I mentioned the past, present, future model. Like I've traveled and did a little study abroad before. Now I'm so interested in doing it more. And this is the perfect program to allow me to pursue the international dream while pursuing the public health dream. 3 people, Alexandra, 3 people are accepted for the scholarship per country per program. So in the final list, it depends on each program whether they will have a wait list, as I mentioned earlier, of, oh, Jordan doesn't want the scholarship, so we'll give it to the next person from the US in line for it. Some will just defer that entire funding slot to the next year. But out of the, 20 per cohort max of a program, 3 will be from the same country, but no more. We probably have time for like 1 or 2 last questions, if anyone has, or Amanda, if you have any last thoughts as well.
I don't.
Right. And if I can ask, so I can ask one last question, kind of a fun one. So far, what's been your favorite memory or experience from your Erasmus Mundus program?
I got to Granada, Spain when like I have mentioned many times, it was COVID. No Americans were allowed to travel to Europe without lots of paperwork. So I got to Granada, and a city that normally has upwards of 80,000 students, 25,000 of which are international. There was one other American student in this entire city. So they referred to me as La Americana for like a solid year and a half. And even when I go back, I see people on the street. They're literally run into them on the street and they know my name, but they're going to refer to me as the American because I was the only one. So very unique experience.
I think my favorite thing so far, anyway, I just started my program, is that I've literally been able to like go and travel every single weekend I've been here. Like literally 2 weeks ago, I just went to Paris for a weekend. And it's so fun to have everything so accessible and like to be so culturally immersed. And obviously there's opportunities to travel in the States, but it's going to take you 10 hours to get somewhere cool. So like it's a little bit, I don't know. And there's so much more history here. It's crazy. It's so fun. And lots of field work and hands-on experience. If you're going into like a science field, biology, ecology, marine science, anything like that, they like every other week we have like a boat trip. This is me on a beach sorting sediment samples. Like I had starfish all over my arm the other day. Like it's been really fun and really cool and a lot of opportunities I necessarily didn't have in a bigger cohort situation like when I did my undergrad. So lots of cool things. I can't pick one.
In terms of country representatives, Suraj, I was actually on the management board of Erasmus Mundus for a while, along with this role. So I don't do that anymore, but they said, we need an American. Do you want to do this? And then a few months ago, Amanda emailed me, didn't realize we both went to South Carolina at the time, and said, like, my name is Amanda. I'm an American Erasmus student too. Like, do you want some help in this process? I saw that they could use more Americans, and I said, sure. So it's a very loose process and we're here to help you guys. There's no formal commitment on our part, which is really fun because we're both from the same school, we get to share with our fellow Gamecocks.
Wonderful. We've officially reached 4:30, so thank you all for your participation. Thank you so much, Jordan and Amanda, for sharing. I mean, I feel like I've learned a lot and I've been advising on this for a few years now, so very excited to share all this information with all the students that I hope will come flooding into the office asking about Erasmus Mundus. But again, we will be sharing this recording and the PowerPoint slides with you all. And if you are a USC student, I highly encourage you to set up an appointment with us on Navigate if you are undergrad, or Calendly if you are a graduate student or alum. And I know I'm working next week till Wednesday, so if you are on break and you are looking for something to do, why not come talk to us? We'll also be here into December, to the third week of December. So very excited to talk with you all about that. And again, thank you so much, Jordan and Amanda, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having us. And I guess it is Thanksgiving next week, so happy early Thanksgiving to you all. Unfortunately, we do not get it off, but
Happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy it for us. Thank you, everyone.
bye. Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting us, Heidi.
Of course. Thank you so much. Everyone have a good night.